My name is Dorothy Ann Whitfield, and today is my 68th birthday. I woke up the same way I have for the past 4 years, alone. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window and the old radiator clicking in the hallway. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and looked at the chair across from me, the one my son used to sit in every Sunday morning when he was small, when he would drag his blanket out of his room and want to eat cereal and watch cartoons and tell me everything that happened in his dreams. That chair has been empty for a long time now. I told myself today would be different. It was my birthday after all. I was wrong. The package arrived at 11:15. I heard the delivery truck pull up and I thought maybe my neighbor Connie had sent flowers again. She does that every year without fail, bless her heart. But when I opened the front door, I found a box wrapped in brown shipping paper sitting on the welcome mat. No flowers, just a box about the size of a shoebox, with my name and address written in handwriting I recognized immediately, even though I hadn't seen it in almost 3 years. My son's handwriting. I stood there in the doorway in my robe and slippers for what felt like a full minute, just staring at it. The rain was misting lightly and the edges of the paper were already going soft. I picked it up and brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it some more. My son, I'll call him my son because that is what he is, even now, had not spoken to me in 2 years and 9 months. Not a call on Christmas. Not a text on Mother's Day. Nothing. The last time I heard his voice was a phone call that lasted 4 minutes, and most of those 4 minutes were him telling me that his wife needed space from our relationship and that he had to respect that. I said I understood. I said I loved him. He said he'd be in touch. That was it. And now this. I found a pair of scissors and cut the tape carefully. Inside the brown paper was a white box, and inside the white box was a tin, one of those decorative holiday tins with a lid that snapped shut. When I opened the tin, I found cookies. Homemade, or at least they looked homemade. Oatmeal with what appeared to be dried cranberries and chocolate chips. There was a small card tucked under the lid. It said, "Happy birthday, Mom. Thought of you. T." T for Thomas. My son. I read that card 3 times. Thought of you. Not I miss you. Not I'm sorry. Not can we talk? Just thought of you. Like I was something that crossed his mind the way you think about a song you used to like or a restaurant that closed down. Something from before. I set the card on the counter and looked at the cookies. They smelled fine. Butter and oats and something sweet. But there was something about the way they sat in that tin, all perfectly arranged, edges touching, that felt wrong to me in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe it was because Thomas had never baked a day in his life that I could remember. When he was a teenager and I tried to teach him to make banana bread, he lasted about 6 minutes before he wandered off to play video games. His wife, on the other hand, she baked constantly. She made elaborate layer cakes and French pastries and took photos of everything for her social media. She was the baker in that house. I thought about that, and then I closed the tin. I called my neighbor Connie around noon. She came over with a store-bought cake and candles, and we sat at my kitchen table, and she sang to me off-key, and I laughed for the first time all day. I showed her the tin and told her what I told you, about Thomas, about the silence, about the card that said, "Thought of you," like I was a passing memory. Connie looked at the tin for a long time. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at the tin. "Are you going to eat them?" she asked. I told her honestly that I didn't know. She picked one up and turned it over in her fingers. "They look fine," she said. "But I understand why you feel strange about it." We ended up leaving the tin on the counter. Connie stayed for 2 hours and we talked about other things. Her grandson's new school, the leaking gutter on my back porch, a movie she'd seen recently that she thought I would like, normal things, birthday things. When she left, she hugged me at the door and told me to call her if I needed anything. After she was gone, I stood in the kitchen, alone again. I picked up one cookie and held it. It felt perfectly ordinary. It smelled perfectly ordinary. It smelled perfectly ordinary. I turned it over, and that's when I saw it. Along the bottom edge of one cookie, there was a faint whitish dusting. Powdery, not flour. Flour has a matte look to it. This had a slightly different quality, almost crystalline. Very faint, easy to miss. I put the cookie back in the tin. I stood very still for a moment. Then I snapped the lid shut. My friend Patricia has a daughter-in-law who works at the county health department. Patricia herself is one of those people who can organize a church potluck for 200 people and make it look effortless, and she has been bringing casseroles to people in crisis since before I was born. She is practical in a way that I have never been, and when I called her that afternoon and told her about the cookies, she didn't say, "Oh, I'm sure it's fine," or "You're probably just being paranoid." She said, "Don't eat them. Don't touch them more than you already have. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Patricia came, looked at the tin, agreed with me that the powder was strange, and then did what Patricia always does. She made a decision. She said she was going to take the tin to her daughter-in-law at the health department on Monday morning when the office opened. It was Friday. She wrapped the tin carefully in a plastic grocery bag and put it in her large purse. I felt relieved. I felt like I had done the right thing. And then Patricia said, "Oh, before I forget, I told the ladies at the church bake sale that I'd bring something for tomorrow. I'm already behind. Do you have anything I could take? Even store-bought, nobody's going to care. I had a box of shortbread cookies I'd bought from the grocery store still sealed in plastic sitting on the pantry shelf." I gave her those. I walked Patricia to her car. She drove away with my box of shortbread in her front seat and Thomas's tin in her purse. I went back inside and I felt fine. I did not feel fine for long. Saturday evening, Patricia's husband Gerald called me. I remember I was sitting on the couch watching the evening news when my phone rang and I saw Gerald's name on the screen, which was unusual. Gerald never called me. Patricia and I were the ones who talked. And I answered it, and right away I could tell from his voice that something was wrong. He told me Patricia had collapsed at the church bake sale that afternoon. She had tasted one of the baked goods at the event. Apparently someone had brought cookies that ended up near Patricia's donation table, and she tried one to be polite. And within an hour she was dizzy, and her lips were numb, and the woman next to her called 911. They took her to Mercy General. She was stable, Gerald said, but the doctors were running tests. They didn't know yet what had caused it. I said, "Gerald, which cookies did Patricia bring to the bake sale?" He said, "Just some shortbread from a box, I think." "Dorothy, why?" I said. "Gerald, I need to ask you something very important. The tin in Patricia's purse, did she bring it to the bake sale too?" There was a pause. "I don't know," he said. "I can tell you she put a lot of things in that bag." She was running late. I hung up and I sat very still on my couch and I thought about how Patricia was going to take that tin to the health department on Monday, and how it was currently Saturday night, and how Patricia was in the hospital, and how I did not know with absolute certainty where that tin was right now. I called Gerald back. I told him he needed to find that tin. I told him it was wrapped in a white plastic bag and it was important that no one opened it. He said he'd look. He called me back 40 minutes later and said he'd found it, still in Patricia's purse, which was hanging on the back of her hospital room chair. He said the nurses had Patricia's belongings in a bag by the bed. The tin was there, unopened. I told him to please keep it there and not let anyone touch it. And then I said, "Gerald, I think you need to tell the doctor about that tin." He said, "Dorothy, what is going on?" I told him everything. The doctor called me at 9 o'clock that night. She was measured and professional and asked me very specific questions. When did I receive the tin? From whom? Had I eaten any? Had anyone else eaten any? Could I describe the substance I saw on the cookies? I answered everything as clearly as I could. She said they were running a full toxicology panel on Patricia and that the information I'd given her was very helpful. Sunday morning, 2 officers came to my house. They were kind. One of them was a woman about my daughter-in-law's age, who had a very calm way of speaking, and the other was an older man who wrote things down in a small notebook. They asked me to walk them through everything from the moment the package arrived. I did. They took the shipping paper and the white box and the card that said, "Thought of you." They asked if they could look around the kitchen. I said yes. They looked in my trash can and found nothing unusual. They looked around my countertops. They asked if anyone had been in my home recently. I said no, just Connie on Friday afternoon and then Patricia. The older officer said, "Mrs. Whitfield, you said your son hasn't been in contact for nearly 3 years. To your knowledge, has he been to your house recently? In the past few weeks?" I said. Not that I know of. He lives in Colorado. I'm in Ohio. He wrote that down. Before they left, the woman officer turned to me in the doorway and said, "You did the right thing by calling us. I want you to know that." I thanked her. I closed the door. And I sat down on my couch and I cried, not because I was frightened, though I was, but because I kept thinking about that card on the counter. Thought of you. I kept thinking about what that meant now, knowing what I knew, or what I suspected. I kept asking myself whether a mother could ever really know her own child, whether love blinded you to things you should have seen, whether the boy who used to drag his blanket out to the kitchen on Sunday mornings had always had this inside him, or whether something had changed him into someone I no longer recognized. I didn't have answers. I'm still not sure I do. Patricia was discharged on Tuesday. The toxicology report came back, and I won't get into the medical specifics because I don't fully understand them myself, but what the doctor told Gerald and what Gerald told me was that Patricia had shown symptoms consistent with ingesting a substance that did not belong in food. They were still running confirmatory tests, but the preliminary results were concerning. The health department had taken custody of the tin. I heard from the detective assigned to the case, a different person from the two officers who had come to my house, on Wednesday afternoon. She asked me several questions about Thomas, about his wife, about the timeline of our estrangement, about whether anyone might have reason to want to harm me. I answered everything. She was thorough and patient, and she did not tell me more than she needed to. What I found out later, partly through the detective and partly through a phone call I received that I was not expecting, was this: Thomas and his wife had been having serious problems, financial problems, specifically. They had borrowed money, a significant amount, from his wife's mother 2 years ago, and the arrangement had apparently gone badly. There were accusations and counterclaims and a great deal of family tension on their side that I had known nothing about. And Thomas, it turned out, had recently updated a beneficiary document, the kind you update when you want to make sure certain things go to certain people. I'll let you sit with that for a moment, because I had to sit with it for a very long time. Connie came over on Thursday evening and brought chicken soup, which felt exactly right. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd opened that package where we'd looked at the tin together, and she held my hand across the table and let me talk. I told her everything. About Thomas, about Patricia, about the detective, about the document. At some point I stopped talking and just looked at my hands and said, "I don't understand how I didn't know." Connie said, "Dorothy, you couldn't have known." I said, "I'm his mother." She said, "Being someone's mother doesn't give you access to who they decided to become." I think about that often now. The hardest part isn't the fear, though the fear was real. It isn't even the grief, though the grief is heavy in a way that sits differently from ordinary loss. It doesn't feel like losing someone. It feels like discovering that someone you thought you knew was a different person all along, and you are the last to find out. It's a very particular kind of alone. I thought about all the Sunday mornings, the cereal and the cartoons and the blanket dragging on the floor. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway on a Saturday in May, and the way he looked back at me over his shoulder when he finally stopped wobbling. I thought about dropping him off at college and crying the whole drive home and thinking I had done my job and done it well. Maybe I did. Maybe the job was done right and something else went wrong later in a place I couldn't reach and couldn't fix. I'll never know for certain. Thomas was contacted by detectives in Colorado. That's all the detective told me at first, that he had been contacted and that the investigation was ongoing. She was careful about what she shared with me, as she should have been. But 2 weeks after my birthday, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it because I'd been answering every number I didn't recognize for 2 weeks, half expecting it to be something important. It was Thomas. He said my name the way he used to say it when he was a boy and had done something he knew was wrong. Mom. Just that one word, and I could hear in it something I hadn't heard in 3 years. He sounded very young and very frightened. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Thomas." He said he was sorry. He said it 3 times. He said he hadn't been thinking right, that he'd been under terrible pressure, that his wife had pushed him and he'd let himself be pushed, and that he knew none of that was an excuse, and that he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. I want to tell you that I said something wise, something that would hold up well in the retelling, but what I actually said was very simple. I said, Thomas, Patricia is my friend. She is 67 years old. She spent 2 nights in the hospital because of what you did. He didn't say anything. I said, you need to cooperate fully with the police. You need to tell them everything. And you need to understand that whatever happens next, you brought it on yourself, and I will not be able to protect you from it. He said, I know. I said, I love you. I have always loved you. That doesn't change what you did. And then I said goodbye and I ended the call. I sat there for a long time after that. The house was quiet. The radiator clicked in the hallway. I thought about whether love was supposed to feel different than this, whether it was supposed to be warmer and softer and easier. But I have lived 68 years, and I've learned that love is not always warm. Sometimes love is the hardest thing you've ever said to someone. Sometimes love is telling the truth to someone who doesn't want to hear it. Sometimes love is not saving a person from the thing they earned. I don't know what will happen to Thomas. The legal process moves slowly, and I've been told it could be months before anything is resolved. Patricia is fully recovered, thank God. She came over last week and we had coffee, and she brought her famous lemon pound cake, and we sat at my kitchen table and talked for 2 hours like we always have. She hasn't said a word about forgiving anything or not forgiving anything. She just came over and brought cake. That's who Patricia is. I put new flowers in the vase on my windowsill. Tulips. Yellow. I cleaned out the front closet, something I'd been putting off for almost a year. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center that starts in 3 weeks. Small things. The kind of small things you do when you are trying to rebuild the ordinary around a hole that someone left behind. I still think about that chair across from me at breakfast. I still sometimes set 2 cups of coffee without meaning to, but I am here, and I am standing, and some mornings that is enough. If you're watching this and you have felt that particular kind of pain, the kind that comes from a family that broke in a way you couldn't prevent, I want you to know that I see you. You are not alone in it. And if you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. We're building something here at Sophia's Family Stories. Not just a channel, but a community of people who understand that family is complicated and love is hard and healing takes time. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need it today. And subscribe so you're here for the next one. I'll be back soon with another story. Take care of yourselves. I have spent a lot of time since that birthday thinking about choices. Not just Thomas's choices, but mine. The small ones that turned out to matter more than I knew. The moment I decided not to eat those cookies. The moment I called Patricia. The moment Patricia put that tin in her purse instead of leaving it on my counter. Every small decision in a chain, and the chain led somewhere none of us expected. That is how I have come to understand what happened. Not as something that was done to me, but as a series of actions and their natural consequences, playing out the way they always do whether we are watching or not. Thomas made choices. They had weight. That weight landed somewhere. It always does. I think about something my father used to say when I was a girl. He wasn't a complicated man. My father, he fixed cars for a living and he had rough hands and he didn't talk much. But he used to say that the truest thing about a person isn't what they tell you about themselves. It's what they do when they think no one is looking and the stakes feel high enough to justify it. I was 68 years old before I understood he was right in a way I hadn't wanted to believe. What I know now is that character is not something you declare. It is something you build, quietly, over years, through the accumulation of small, honest choices. And it is also something you can erode, quietly, the same way. Thomas did not become a different person overnight. Something changed in him slowly, and I did not see it, and I have had to make my peace with the fact that I could not have seen it from where I was standing. But here is the other side of that. Patricia came over last week with lemon pound cake. Connie still sings off-key at my kitchen table. The detective who sat across from me in my living room was thorough and decent and took me seriously. These people, their choices also had weight. Their weight also landed somewhere. It landed here, in the form of me still standing. That is what I want to hold on to. Not the betrayal, though it is real. Not the grief, though it runs deep. But the evidence, all around me. that most people, when tested, choose to show up for a friend, for a stranger, for a 68-year-old woman sitting alone in a house in Ohio on her birthday. I did not rescue myself from this. I was rescued in small, quiet ways by people who made good choices when it mattered, and I think that is the truest argument I know for living with integrity. Not because it protects you from everything, but because it builds around you, over time, a community of people who will carry you when you cannot carry yourself. I am still here. I am still standing. And I am grateful, not in spite of what happened, but alongside it. That is enough for today.